for the pizzas that will be showing up during the break. Bruntwood have given us the venue for free, which is fantastic of them. And JetBrains have given us some codes to give away as prizes later on. So I'll get to that in a minute. Please follow us on social media. We're at LeedsJS on Twitter, and hopefully you all found it through Meetup. We currently use Meetup. In the next 6 months, that's going to change, but you will all be updated on that. We stream our events, so if you go to youtube.com/LeedsJS, you will find videos from previous events, and you'll see tonight's videos if you want to catch up on them again. There would be stickers on the table at the back, but I forgot them, so I'm sorry. And we don't do Q&A. We let you come up and speak to the speakers either in the break or at the end. So please feel free to speak to them afterwards, as long as they're happy to. We have a code of conduct. If you want to read the full version, you can go to that URL. I'm going to read out a short version. So LeedsJS is dedicated to providing harassment-free meetup experiences for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, religion, or age. We do not tolerate harassment of meetup participants in any form. Sexual language and imagery is not appropriate for any meetup venue or online discussion, including talks given at the events. LeedsJS members violating these rules may be sanctioned or expelled from the group at the discretion of the group's organizers. Next up, there's an event called Global Diversity CFP Day. It's on the 2nd of March. If you're from an underrepresented group in tech and want to be a conference speaker, then please come along to this event. There's events all over the country, all over the world. That's why it's global. And it's a day where people will mentor you to be able to write a talk. My phone is ringing. That'll be the pizzas. Pizzas can wait. Yeah, people will mentor you to write a talk, to come up with a submission so that you can submit it to a conference. So if you go to globaldiversitycfpday.com and look for your local event, there's one that I'm helping mentor at in Leeds, down at the Sky Bet offices, with Lorna Mitchell, Katie Fenn, and Chad Gowler. There's one in Sheffield. I think someone's setting one up in Manchester. They're all over the place. So if you go there and have a look, you'll find something. And then the prize draw. So we have the 2 JetBrains codes to give away. JetBrains, if you don't know, make IDEs and editors for various languages. We have 2-year subscriptions, 2 one-year subscriptions to give away for any JetBrains Toolbox product of your choice. So if you go to tinyurl.com/LeedsJS Jan 2019, you just put your name in there, and that's it. We don't ask for an email address unless you win. Or if you tweet with the hashtag LeedsJS, we pick a random tweet out of that, and somebody wins. The more times you tweet, the more entries you get in that case. We deduplicate the name one because that's really easy and it doesn't get us anything. So yeah, please tweet if you want to take pictures and stuff. Take pictures and hashtag them and whatever. And besides that, first up we have, and I'm blanking on names now. I'm so Jamie, yes. We've got Jamie who's going to be talking about the JAMstack. So if Jamie wants to come up, and we'll switch over, and then I can go and get the pieces.
Is that better? Ooh. Right.
Okay, cool. Let's work. Go ahead on my end. To break everything.
Yeah.
Just speak. Just to check the volume.
Yeah, is that alright? Oh, hello? Yeah, good? Hi. Cool. Right. Hi everyone. Yep, so my name's Jamie Bradley. I'm a front-end developer from a lovely little town called Middlesbrough. And I've come here today to talk about JAMstack. I'm just going to kind of get this out in the open. This is the second event I've done ever, so it's probably going to go one of two ways. It's going to go really good or really shit. But hopefully it's either really good or somewhere in the middle. But massive thanks to the guys at LeedsJS for letting me come along. And yeah, I really hope you enjoy the talk. Just come and grab me at the end if you've got any questions. I'm quite open to talking. So before we start, I just want to kind of do a little bit of advertising about a company that I run called Endeavour Digital. So we're a digital agency in Middlesbrough, specialising in front-end solutions, in particular JavaScript applications, Gatsby websites, and of course JAMstack websites. So, you know, if you're working for an agency and you're short on resource, then you can give us a shout and we can send someone over to help. Or if you work for a business and you need a website, we're kind of the guys to go to. So again, if this is something that you'd like to talk further about, just ask me for a card and I can hand that over. So with that said, let's start with the topic today. So what is JAMstack? Well, it's probably fair to start by saying that the way that websites are developed is starting to change. We're starting to see that front-end layers are starting to move away from this whole monolithic approach now, and what we're finding is that front-end solutions are starting to communicate with back-ends over APIs. And this is really good because as front-end developers it means we can use whatever fancy framework we like, or you know, whatever the next big thing is, and this makes us feel pretty cool. But another thing that's actually been changing over time is static websites. Oh, Sam, this... there we go. Blame Sam for that. He gave us this remote and it's gone a bit... yeah, so static websites. So we're moving away from this traditional idea that a static website is just a pretty ugly, boring brochure site. We've now got moving parts, and we can use things like serverless functions to make our static sites a little bit more interesting, which I'm sure we'll hear about more later on. And also with the introduction of things like headless content management solutions, so you know, WordPress can be a headless CMS solution if you want it to be. You've got things like Contentful, there's tons. And with the likes of React and Angular and Vue making, you know, JavaScript applications much more powerful, and just the whole JavaScript ecosystem in general getting better, we can do more in the browser. So we don't really have static websites per se anymore. We now need a new term, and then this is where the guys from Netlify came along and formulated this term, JAMstack. Now, if you're interested in this kind of thing, there's a podcast that Netlify put together called JAMstack Radio. And in one of the very earlier episodes, there's an episode with the co-founder of Netlify, Matt Bielman, and he basically talks about how this term came about and how he spoke to people within the community and they came up with a term. And I think the best thing to compare JAMstack to now is what Ajax used to be like. You know, no one really wanted to start talking about XML HTTP requests all the time. We needed a term, Ajax. And then once we had this term, people could understand it, relate to it, and you know, we are where we are today now. So, JAMstack is a static website architecture. It's not necessarily about specific technologies. It doesn't dictate what you should be using to build your site. It's more so a case of a set of standards and best practices that we could follow to build websites that deliver better performance, higher security, low cost of scaling, and what's really good for us as developers is that the development experience is a lot better. So yeah, it's more than just being about static websites. Now, I've kind of put this in because I do talk about Netlify quite a lot throughout this talk. Is there anyone here that's using Netlify? So there's a good handful. So that's good because you guys can learn about it today, the rest of you, but I'm not a salesman, because I will talk about it a lot. It's the perfect tool for this kind of architecture, which we'll look at later on. So don't think I'm going to walk out that door with a nice big commission when you guys sign up. So if we look at the actual definition of JAMstack. So this is taken from a website called JAMstack.org. It's a modern web development architecture based on client-side JavaScript, reusable APIs, and pre-built markup. So this is where the term JAM comes from. Sorry. This is where the term JAM comes from. And basically these three elements stack together to formulate an architecture, JAMstack. So if we look into the individual elements, so when we talk about JavaScript at a JAMstack site, we're saying that any dynamic programming during the request response cycle should be handled by JavaScript, which only runs on the client. So that's quite important. We're not talking about isomorphic rendering or server-side rendering with React. As an example, we're talking about purely client-side JavaScript. And again, because it's not enforcing what stack you should be using per se, you can achieve this with a site that's built purely with vanilla JavaScript, or if it's using a UI library, or jQuery, React, Vue, whatever. It can be absolutely anything. As for APIs, so this sort of fits into what we were talking about earlier about this movement of abstracting front-end layers away from a monolithic build. What we're saying here is that all server-side processes or database actions should basically be managed over an API that's served over HTTPS, and it has to be handled via JavaScript. So this could be a custom API that you might have built for your own needs. It could be something like Contentful, or even something like Stripe if you were looking to handle payment gateways on your website. So finally, markup. Now this is, for me, this is sort of like the icing on the cake, because when we talk about JAMstack sites and the better performance, the reason why JAMstack sites are more performant is because of this statement here. Markup is templated and pre-built at deploy time. So I'll sort of allude onto this a little bit further shortly. But in order to achieve this with a JAMstack site, we would use something like a static site generator. So Gatsby is a big one at the moment. That's something that we really like using, mainly because of like the React side of things. But there's tons. You could use Jekyll, Hugo, the list goes on. But to be honest, there's another way to do it, which is to use just a regular build tool like Gulp or Webpack. So within Endeavour, sometimes we do like PSD HTML jobs, and we just spin up a really, really simple little Webpack config file that lets us use a templating language called Nunjux, and we send that off to the client, and the client's usually a back-end developer, so he's happy because he gets a nice templated set of templates that he can work with. Now this is a really good site, staticgen.com. If you're looking for a static site generator, or you're just interested in seeing what's out there, you can go on here and see that there's a million. But it's really useful because it lets you order the results that it returns by GitHub stars and Twitter followers and things, and you can narrow down what language it's being built with. So if you're interested in JavaScript-based ones, then you can narrow them down that way. But yeah, definitely worth taking a look at this. So we've talked about what JAMstack is, but let's have a look very quickly at a simple example as to what a JAMstack site wouldn't be and why. So I'm going to say that we've got a very, very simple WordPress-based website, for example. Let's assume it's for something like a plumber. They don't need a lot. So our users are going to make a request to a URL called mysite.com. It's going to hit the web server. This page needs to return some data back from a database, WordPress content management system. So, it's going to make a request to our database server and then return the content back to the web server. And now there's a process which is going to take place whereby that data needs to be passed into some templates, and then another process takes place that converts that to HTML, sends that back to the user along with any CSS and JavaScript and whatever other assets we need. Now I never actually put this in my last talk, but it's something that I've been working with recently. So there's a website that we're working on at the moment, and we're using SendGrid, which is a pretty good API for sending emails and such. And if we were to look at doing this in the traditional sense, we would probably need to look at setting up potentially a separate proxy server. But what we've actually been able to do is make this request with just a simple Lambda function, which is really good. It means that we don't have an additional server to maintain, so we can look at that shortly. And then, we've got like client-side API calls that might be taking place to something like Instagram to return, photos and such. So the key here, and when we compare this to a JAMstack site, is that the magic's happening at runtime. Yes, that process of taking the data, passing it down, etc., it's all happening at runtime. And I'm not saying this is the case for all sites by all means, but I'm pretty sure we've all at one point been onto a WordPress website that has tons of plugins on it, and there's lots going on during runtime, and we just find ourselves doing this, right? We're swearing at the computer, we're unhappy, users are unhappy, the drop rate's high, because its performance sucks, basically. And, you know, think about the developers. I mean, I think back to years back when there was no processes in place and we were having to FTP straight into servers and there was no version control and there's nothing to define that as such. But JAMstack would take that away, which we'll allude to shortly. So let's assume we are building a JAMstack site and that we want dynamic content within this JAMstack or static site. The question is, how are we going to be able to get content from a content management system into our static website? So we've got a JAMstack site here that's going to be built with a headless CMS. So in this example here, we're basically referring to Contentful. So what happens is we either have a developer that's going to make a change to some code and push it up to a Git repository, or a content editor is going to make a change to, I don't know, an article inside of Contentful. When that change has been made, whether it's on Git or whether it's via Contentful, it's going to trigger a webhook. And in this example, again, sorry, we're referring to Netlify, but a webhook is sent to a service such as Netlify to trigger a deployment. Now let's assume that the static site generator we're using is Gatsby. And what Gatsby is going to do is it's going to make an API request over to Contentful and get the data we need. It's going to return the data back into Netlify, and then if you're familiar with Gatsby, you'll be familiar that it filters the data down with GraphQL. So that process is going to take place. It'll run all of the GraphQL queries, get all of the data, do the hydration, return some HTML back to us, and it goes straight to our user. But the key thing to remember here, all of this guff here has taken place during deployment. Our users are just going to get that point there. They're just going to get exactly what they need. So the difference in performance is rapid because they're just getting plain HTML effectively. And then this just demonstrates the example I mentioned earlier. You know, with Netlify, you can create these things called Netlify functions, which are just Lambda functions, basically. But this means that we can call server-side code on demand with a function as a service. So there's a second potential example for passing dynamic content into a JAMstack site. And here's the mention of Netlify again. But Netlify have released a content management system which is actually based on flat files. So your backend, and this took me quite a while to get my head around this at the start with, but the backend is actually your Git repository. So when you log into Netlify as a content editor and you add a page or you make a change to a post, what's actually happening is Netlify CMS is generating a markdown file, communicating with your Git repository and pushing that file straight up. Now, because the idea behind JAMstack is that it works off webhooks, Netlify, in this case, knows that a change has been made to the GitHub repository, well, the Git repository, sorry, and it's re-triggering the deployment again. And it's doing that whole process of telling it to build. Gatsby is going to go off and read the file system, get the new file, get that data back, and voila, we have some content. So again, there's a very similar site to Static Gen called headlesscms.org, and you can come onto here and basically try and find your next headless content management system or flat file system. So yeah, with JAMstack, the magic happens during deployment so that the user just gets what they need to get. The users are now happy because the site's really fast, and the developers are even happier because they have less chew to worry about. So, it's probably fair to say that there might be some amongst us who are probably sitting here who've never heard of it and are thinking that JAMstack's like a new thing and it's going to die down pretty soon, and that's completely understandable because when I first heard about it, that's exactly the approach I took. But it's actually not a new thing. I want to go back to 2014 to a time when I worked with a company called ClickScore. And at the time, I was working with a guy called Ben Cooper, who was a front-end developer. And he shared an article with me by a company called Carrot Creative. And what Carrot Creative were doing at the time is that they were basically publicising the fact that they had moved away from these traditional like WordPress or CMS builds, and they were actually starting to make use of this thing called a headless CMS. But not only that, what they were doing is that they were making requests to the headless CMS during deployment. So this screenshot here is taken from an article that was written in 2014, and the architecture is exactly what we've just been looking at. So this thing's actually been around for, you know, good nearly 5 years. It's just that there was no term for it. But now we have the term JAMstack, we can relate to it, and, you know, as I was saying earlier, it's only just going to get better. But yeah, if you basically Google Carrot JAMstack, you can probably find the article. I'd really recommend it, or I can make sure these slides get shared out, which has all of the links on it. So we've briefly talked about benefits as we've touched through the slides, but we can go into it in a little bit more detail. So first of all, we have supersonic loading speeds, so it's faster basically. Now if you think about what a JAMstack site is, the security benefits are going to be greater because we're just returning static HTML, yeah? And because of the type of content that we're sending back to the user, we can actually host the website on a CDN, which means that we can scale a lot easier and we can do it cheaper. So when we talk about performance, we've touched upon pre-built markup already. That whole process of generating the markup is happening away from the user's realm, if you will. Now, one of the standards in the whole JAMstack architecture is that there should be this use of atomic deployments. Now, basically what that means is when a deployment takes place because some content's been updated, the latest version of your website before the change will always stay alive until the next deployment is successful. So in other words, you haven't got this worry that you're going to put a deployment out and your site's going to be down during that phase, which is ideal if you've got content editors making changes all the time because you don't want your site up and down. And then as part of that, JAMstack sites should also take use of instant caching validation. So once the deploy is done and your site's live, it really is live. You don't have this queue of having to say, oh, clear your cache, and then you'll see the change. It's done on the server and it's sorted. We've talked about hosting the site on a CDN. There's just general performance benefits in doing this anyway. But one thing that really is worth noting as well is that there is examples of like large-scale sites using this architecture. So Smashing Magazine made this move in about 2016, and they actually made the move to use Netlify CMS, which was the second example we looked at. So, you know, when the editors post a story, they're actually, you know, generating a markdown file and it's reading the Git repository. But they actually noted a performance boost 10 times greater than what they had previously, which was on a WordPress setup. I don't have the link to hand, but I can try and send it out on Twitter or something. I'll make sure it gets shared accordingly. So let's look at security. So there's no direct interaction with your database from the browser, basically. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's not completely, I think it would be wrong for me to say that it's indestructible, yeah. There's always going to be some vulnerability somewhere, especially if you're relying on a third party. But there's certainly reduced attack vectors because, you know, all we're getting back to for the user, is just plain HTML. There's a really good analogy that, so my colleague Jack's here somewhere, and we were talking about how to, how can we best explain this in this sort of environment, and we came up with this analogy of a bridge. If you've got one side of the bridge here and one side of the bridge here, let's assume it's a big valley, and let's, I don't know, go back to medieval times when you had people killing each other all the time. If there was a war, and there was a bridge in the middle, they could just go straight through it and attack each other's side. And you could probably put barricades in between to try and slow it down, but the fact of the matter is it's going to be fairly easy to go there. In comparison to removing the bridge, it's much harder for one side to get over to the other side. So the point I'm making is that it's possible to get there, but it's a lot harder to do it. And as part of this additional security, what we're doing is we're leveraging domain experience from a specialist third-party service. So, like I said before, there's always going to be a chance that by putting your faith in a third-party service like Contentful, there could be a vulnerability somewhere, but you're relying on their expertise to take care of that, so that burden is off your shoulder. It's one less thing to worry about. And just to sort of, kind of elaborate on that a little bit more, there's a guy called Phil Hawksworth who works for Netlify, there it is again, and he posted an article about, about this idea of moving the complexity elsewhere. And in his article, he basically says that JAMstack indeed moves complexity elsewhere. It moves it out of the critical path at request time. It moves it out of your area of responsibility, and it moves it over to domain experts who offer specialized services as commodities. It is perfectly possible that complexity still exists, but we don't need to shoulder that burden. In the same way as wireless routers depend on wires and serverless functions run on servers somewhere, but not in my house. So yeah, I thought I'd put that in there because when I read it, it just sort of like gelled it all together quite nicely for me. And hopefully it did for you. So hosting and scalability. So we can use affordable services, like Netlify. We have, S3, things like that, Cloudflare, etc. It's much cheaper to scale your site because it's being served through a CDN. It's not like you have to spin up another web server somewhere. It's a simpler site, therefore it's more secure and much easier to maintain, so there's less unpredictable costs. So if you think of the costs that you might, have to go through when you're having to send developers to fix unknown issues and things, when you think of it that way, if you've got a static site, there's a lot less of that. So yeah, as a result, because of all of the standards that we have in place, basically, as we've talked about, the idea behind JAMstack is that it relies on version control. So you were already like buying into that by using this architecture. So that's good. I mean, we should be doing it anyway, but like I say, there are some people that don't. We don't have any of the carry-on that we had with like templating languages and worrying about PHP and WordPress and things. You can build your front end however you like, essentially. You have much more control from the front end perspective, and I think that's quite nice. There's a project that we've been working on where we're using WordPress as a headless CMS solution, and Gatsby is our front end layer, and I've never enjoyed building a WordPress site so much because it just means I can focus on what I know. But yeah, there's tons of other things that Netlify can offer. I won't go into it, but I would highly recommend checking them out if you get a chance. But of course, there's always going to be some trade-offs. But the trade-offs are quite small. Sorry, button. Watching you, Sam Beckham. So, when we think of the headless CMS, we don't get instant previews anymore because there's no association with a theme like there would be with a regular WordPress build. So if you think of like the little preview button at the top right, if you were using that as a headless CMS solution, you would click on it, the theme's dumb, so it's not going to show anything. However, Gatsby recently hosted an event called Gatsby Days where they were basically talking about the future of Gatsby as a static site generator, and one thing that these guys have been talking about introducing is an instant preview product. That's good and well. I imagine there's probably going to be a cost to pay, so some people will be okay with that. Smaller companies like us guys, we probably wouldn't be. But what I'm hoping works all right is a little demonstration that I can show you this evening, which shows you a way that you can preview data before it's published. So it is possible to do. As a result of having to wait for the deployment to finish before you can see the content on the site, you don't get the instant result. So if you're working for a company or you own a website that is, big, huge news site, for example, and you need instant data out there, then at this stage, maybe JAMstack's not quite there because users are going to have to be waiting a couple of minutes, and if that's a thing, then yeah, it's probably something to reconsider. But again, something that came out of the Gatsby days was a way that was these guys trying to suss out a way that they could reduce deployment time, which sounds really exciting, to be honest. And as you might have gathered throughout the talk, not to talk it down too much, but there's quite a lot to take in to start with. There's a lot of tools. There can be more configuration, and then this is my little penny in against Netlify, but their product actually takes away a lot of the hard work. If you tried to set up an architecture like this from scratch, it would be quite hard, but with their platform, they actually offer a lot of integration that's automated. But it can be trickier for new starters, and then of course it introduces this lovely thing that I like to call shiny syndrome, which is where front-end developers, sorry, this sounds like I'm attacking, and I'm not, because I'm one. But we as front-end developers are very excited by new technologies, so we see the next thing come along, and we think it's really shiny, and we want to use it, and there's always the risk by having that flexibility that we might actually start using something that is eventually going to be no longer maintained and we're in a problem, and I'm speaking from experience. So I think as long as you have standards in place within your team, no matter how small or big it is, and you have a unified decision as to what technologies you're using, I can't see that being a big problem, but it's certainly a possibility. Oh, this bloody thing. Sorry. So, with that said, I'm going to move on to a demo, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about the client. Now, originally what I wanted to do was show you the WordPress CMS project that we were actually working on within Endeavour for a paid client, but it didn't quite work out. So what I've kind of done, my wife owns this company called You First Nutrition, and she's basically a nutrition coach. So if you were if you needed help losing weight and you were looking for a diet plan, or if you were an athlete and you were looking for a tailored diet plan to contribute towards the sport that you do, then you would consider speaking to someone like Mel, so she could help you out accordingly. She's only just started up, I think she's only been going for about a month or two, but she needs a website, so naturally as the husband I'm left with the responsibility of dealing with that. But because we couldn't show the other site, I basically had to smash something together really quick. So we'll see how this goes, this demonstration, but what we can do is I aim to show you the instant preview, so getting a draft post, previewing it instantly, and then explaining how that's been done through Gatsby. Triggering a deployment so that we can see the integration between the WordPress end and Netlify, and then obviously the site, and then hopefully it's all hunky-dory. So if you can just give me 2 minutes, I'll get everything up and then we can go from there. Please feel free to talk amongst yourselves, by the way. Don't feel like you have to be silent. Sorry, is it mucked it up or?
No, I'm just saying be careful. I can't go above certain resolutions.
Oh, no, I'm making it smaller if anything, so it's not going to get any bigger than that, basically. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, the problem is the 4K version of the capture window is a PCI one. It doesn't easily understand and is separate. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're there. So, I'll start first of all by working from WordPress. So, what we've done, we've developed a theme that's basically, it literally does nothing. There's one line of code inside of the index PHP, which is just going to redirect a user back to the Gatsby site. So this is to prevent people from trying to hit what would be the API route. So if they try and go to there, they're just going to get binned off and go straight to Netlify, basically. That's the technical term. And then what we've done is we've created some custom post types. So we have recipes, and this is so that if Mel wants to publish a recipe and make it public and share it on social media, then she can do. And there's a little bit of advanced custom fields going on so that she can generate a table with macronutrient information and stuff like that, things that we're probably not that interested in. So let's take an example here. So we've got this draft recipe test, that looks good. And let's assume that we're going to put some content here. Sorry. So I'm not going to publish it at this point, I'm going to save the draft. Now, what would happen normally without any form of previewing is that if the user clicked on the preview button, they would see nothing, and what the content editor would have to do is they would have to actually publish this article, trigger a deployment, and then wait for it to come through and see it, which is a bit of a pain if there's lots of content, and you know, there's always the risk that there might be something in there that you don't want to see, spelling mistake or something. I'm not suggesting they're going to put some horrible thing on there, but the point is that that might not be ideal. So what a user would do is click preview, but 20 minutes before coming out, that stopped working. So here's one I made earlier. So I'm running the site locally, basically. So Mel can go to a preview page here where she can log in. Now, what's happening here is Gatsby has this concept of, I think they call it like hybrid. So basically, you have the static side of Gatsby where it will take React templates and get all of the data and hydrate it and then spit out static HTML. But then there is also this concept of like incorporating the web application side of it in there. So what I've done is I've configured Gatsby to say any URL that's after preview, I don't want Gatsby router to treat that as a static page. I want it to treat that as a single page application. So what this is effectively an SPA inside of the static build, yeah? So what we've done, the single page application side of things is talking to the WordPress REST API, and that's being handled via functions in Netlify, so it's all serverless. I haven't got a separate backend running or anything here, with the exception of the headless CMS, of course. And what this is doing is this is returning any recipes or any posts that are in a draft state. So we can see that the draft recipe test is there, and then we can also see the hello LeedsJS bit that we've incorporated. Now when we click on this, I'm actually making use of the Gatsby template inside the build. It's just the data that's being passed into it, which is different. So normally what would happen is GraphQL would do its thing and pass the data through that way. But what we're doing here is we're saying when the component mounts basically do a fetch request to my serverless function to get me the content that I need for this post, it determines what type of what type of template to render based on the URL, and that's what we've got. If I just go back. Yeah. Sorry, I just had like a bit of a brain fart there. Yeah, so let's assume everything's okay with this content, and then what we want to do is actually publish that. So when we click this, it's going to hit another serverless function, which is then going to tell WordPress that the status of this post is updated. So I hit publish, that disappears, and when we go into Netlify and go into deploys, we'll see that a deployment started. So this is the process now of the whole JAMstack process. What's going to happen is this is going to deploy. I won't spend too long in this screen. I wouldn't expect you to watch a deploy log. But the point I'm trying to make is that the deployment started. So it's now getting the latest version of the code from the GitLab repository, and then it's going to run a set of commands, Gatsby build, etc., and carry on. Now, while that's doing that, I just wanted to take a quick moment to show you around like the Netlify dashboard. So this is where all of our, serverless functions live. So we can dive into here and we can see how many requests have been made throughout a given time, because you have limits with Netlify on the free tier. But we can also use this as a way of debugging the actual function. So hopefully now, oh no, it's still building. Come on. Didn't think this through really, did I? Yeah, so this is probably a good point to make actually. So, we talked about this idea of atomic deployments and how the site's not down. This here, this isn't the local machine. This site is actually the Netlify hosted version. And then the idea being is that when this thing stops, yay, site is live, that's good. So then we can come back here, we can reload this. It's been purged, it's there. We've got hello LeedsJS, yay. I'm happy because last time at front-end Northeast it didn't work, yay. But yeah, that's it. To be honest, it's a bit of a daft example. It's really simple, but you get the idea. We have a fully working headless content management system with WordPress, which gives us, the customization that we need. It keeps our clients happy because for some reason clients love WordPress. So we can still build a nice, happy JAMstack site with that backend. But there's also tons of different options that you can look at. So I guess a few things to take away from here. If you've not come across Netlify before, certainly have a look at it, especially if you're interested in hosting static solutions, like static site solutions, sorry. And Gatsby.js is a static site generator because it's brilliant, especially if you're into React. and GraphQL, because that's pretty much the heart and soul of it. And yeah, I think that's it. My Twitter handle is JamieBradley234, so if you don't catch me in between the talks, then just drop me a message on Twitter. I'm quite open about this kind of stuff and happy to chat, so thanks very much.